Yasmine, Yasmine is from Muslim Association of Britain and one of the organizers of the marches that take place in the street of London. Yasmine.
Thank you for having me. It's an honour to be here in Tower Hamlets. If I was to sum up in one sentence why the crackdown, and that's been the biggest question, it's because this is a winning movement. This is a movement that hasn't stopped, hasn't slowed down, hasn't reduced its efforts, despite the crackdown, despite the intimidation techniques, and despite the harassment from every state institution. This is a movement that has continued to score wins upon wins and continued to revive its efforts to call for Palestinian liberation. Never in history has such a state been isolated on the world stage. Israel now is a pariah state. Israel is isolated on the global stage. Israel is on trial for genocide, for war crimes upon war crimes, and first and foremost that's due to the Palestinians in Gaza. But secondly, that's due to our movement. There has never been such a larger movement globally that has sustained its efforts for more than 16 months. And I often get asked, what's the point, right? What's of the protest? But there was one video that I saw recently on Middle East Eye that really stuck with me. And it was actually of someone that attended the protest here in London, and she actually comes from a Zionist family. And she said, after months and months of the genocide, this was her first time attending the protest. And she said, that the protest had woken her up to the reality of what was happening in Gaza. That how can a movement that brings people from all walks of life be wrong, right? And that's the message that we need to hone in on. And that's what makes this movement so diverse and so big, because it touches on every corner of society. And the thing that threatens the state the most about all of this is that Palestine has exposed an entire system. Now, when you ask, for example, why university students are protesting, why healthcare workers in this country are protesting, why trade unions are standing up for this issue, is because Palestine affects every single one of these areas. Why are tuition fees being used to invest and partner with Israeli universities that have been the cornerstone of providing research for the IDF? Why are healthcare facilities in the government's increased privatization being used to partner with Israeli companies? Why are schools, for example, cracking down on students that wear Free Palestine badges, right? It's because it's woken up an entire system. And this is why I always say our fight is never against people, because as we've seen between the Conservatives and the Labour, the only difference when it comes to Gaza and many other issues is the colour of the rosette that they wear on election night, right? We are fighting systems, we are not fighting individuals. We are fighting systems that dehumanise any single one of us. We are fighting systems that continue to deny the dignity of Palestinians and therefore the dignity of all of us. And so that's exactly what threatens the state, is because Palestine has exposed the corruption that the government has used in every corner of the state and every state institution that has contributed to this genocide. I'm from Scotland, and for example, we've recently discovered that our local council was investing in security surveillance with Israeli companies, was using AI tech from Israeli companies to use surveillance cameras across our city. Why? Surely, what's the reason behind that? And so that's why the state feels so threatened, because never has there been such a massive crackdown on the individuals calling for the end of a genocide as opposed to the genocide itself, right? What's so bizarre about the crackdown that we saw on the 18th of January, and there's many bizarre details there, is the fact that You're cracking down on the leaders that are calling for the end of the genocide and the state's complicity in this genocide, rather than the genocide itself. You know, all of a sudden we don't have money for investing in the NHS, we don't have money to invest in our schools, we don't have money to invest in social welfare, but we have endless amount of money to continue to send weapons, to continue to send aid to a state that is on trial for genocide. And again, it wasn't the goodwill of David Lammy or anyone else that prevented the, or kind of put a pause to the less than 10% of arms export. It was because of this movement. And we saw that when Starmer, just a few weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago now, was rushing on the phone to Netanyahu to reassure him that he would reinstate those arms exports. And that's why we have to continue, and that's why we have to continue to mobilise, and that's why we have to continue to stand up against every single crackdown. This is a government, and people often forget, this is a government that introduced Prevent. Yes, it was made a statutory duty by the Conservatives, but ultimately it was the government that brought counter-terrorism legislation into our schools, into our healthcare system, and made vulnerable people suspicious. And so this is the same government that is continuing that theme of expanding counter-terrorism legislation, and we have seen them using counter-terrorism legislation against those that are standing up against the genocide, right? How absurd, but again, that shows you how fragile this state is, how threatened it feels, and never have we been a more stronger movement. Never has the state been so threatened and fragile. And that's why we can't respond to their intimidation techniques by slowing down our efforts. No, we have to keep mobilising and escalating, like Ben had mentioned. 20 years from now, and I'm so confident in this, 20 years from now, people will talk about the wonders that this movement done and the protests carried out. And people will speak about in awe about how this movement continued to bring people from all walks of life into society, into this movement. And so we have to keep going. We've never been so closer to Palestinian liberation. We have never been so closer to bringing down the system that dehumanizes one of us, because a dehumanization and the imprisonment and the continued harassment of one of us is the continued dehumanization of all of us. And we saw that beautifully being carried out during the general election, for example, right? People broke away from the two-party system. People said, no, it's not enough to accept evil and lesser evil, right? And as we've seen again from the Conservatives and Labour, they both compete to see who dehumanizes the Palestinians the most, right? And we saw that play out last week at PMQs. So again, you always have to remind yourself the difference when it comes to Gaza and many other issues isn't the parties, because the only difference between them is the colour of the rosette that they wear on election night. They have one system, and so that is why we have to redouble our efforts and work together. If this movement will continue to succeed, it has to continue to reach out to every aspect of society. It has to continue to build and build. Thank you. It has to continue to build upon it and redouble its effects every corner of this society, as we have seen. Why are our pension funds being invested in war crimes, right? Why are they being invested in illegal settlements, right? And beautifully, when the government tried to clamp down on it, we saw more councils divesting from it, right? People are slowly waking up, and therefore the state has never felt so threatened. So let's continue this, let's continue to build our movement, let's redouble our efforts, let's continue to show up for those that have been unjustly charged and detained by the state, and let's continue to fight until Palestinians can live freely and with dignity from the river to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you.